I'd like to take his face off.
Babble, Bullshit, and Beyond, a podcast hosted by me, Marco Kiris, bringing you a standards perspective of the film industry and an immigrant's perspective on America. The most fluffy, fun pop bullshit you can tune into. Today on the show, we have the pleasure of talking with Michael Colleary, co-writer of the John Woo mega blockbuster movie Face Off, which I had the privilege of working alongside Nicolas Cage as his stand-in in the greater LA area. With this year marking the 20th anniversary of the film, Michael and I will be reminiscing and sharing insight on one of the most iconic cult classics from the 1990s.
Hey, Marco.
How are you, Michael?
That's great quality. I'm great. How are you? It's a little. Your poster's a little distracting. I've got a.
It is. It's my head is in between two big boobs. It's kind of like my life story, except I'm the bigger boob. And I don't want to flaunt my big fat Greek hairy nibbles in front of you, but you know.
How are you?
Good. How are you? We're wearing the same sweater.
It looks that way, yeah. Comfort is king, you know?
That's the
way it's got to be.
You're in your office, right?
I am. I'm in my home office.
Good.
Is this okay? Is this in a...
Yeah, it's
okay.
beautiful. So, Michael, it's great to finally see you after over 10 years, but haven't really seen you in almost 20 years. And it is the 20th anniversary of the release of the movie Face Off.
That's correct.
I wasn't thinking about that much. I can't believe it's been 20 years.
I can't either. It's flown by. It's crazy.
I mean, it's an iconic film. Until I saw your note that it was a 20th anniversary, I had no idea. Are they doing anything about that? Is Paramount having some kind of a fun release?
I don't know. I have not heard a word about that. And usually I probably would have heard something. But of course, it's been a new regime there for a long, long time. And, you know, as you know, 20 years is ancient history.
Yeah.
And but I have heard nothing about. They did a 10-year anniversary DVD. But Mike and I are the ones who kind of kept that going. We sort of went to the studio and they came to us. The studio went, well, if you can get John Woo and all these, you know, everyone involved, we said, so they let us do a lot of the heavy lifting, but we haven't done anything. We didn't reach out to them for the 20th or anything like that. So, but I don't know. It plays on, you know, as you know, that plays on cable all the time. So I guess they feel like, why do anything extra? It still floats around on HBO. So,
well, it's a great film. I was very proud to have worked on it. It was an exhausting film, I will say. And fortunately, I'm still getting residual checks from that film for some strange reason. I didn't know how the system worked, but boy, am I thinking my lucky stars to this very day.
Yeah, it was on TV the other night. I saw your scene. So, yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
I was a little more bloated and beyond during that particular time. I was on so much Tylenol just to get through the day, and coffee and cappuccinos because the hours were so extensive.
And the prison was I know people were really sick during that phase. Yes. There was a lot of flu going around. That was over Christmas, right? So I think people were really... And they were wound, you know, kind of just worn down by that point because they'd been shooting for a couple months at least. So, yeah, it was a long shoot. It was 6 months.
It was. I thought it was 5.5 to 6 months. You're right. And that prison scene, which actually got me very sick as well. And I'm sure there was asbestos and stuff in there because it was a non-operating prison. It was in downtown LA, wasn't it?
The prison was set in a power plant.
Oh, right. The power plant.
So there may very well have been, certainly there was a lot of dust in there. And they may have been asbestos. Who knows? Yeah,
I mean, probably, I'm going to guess. But, and I love the loft scenes that we had shot. That was fantastic. I don't remember. It was, that was somewhere downtown.
It was. That was in an old high-rise that gets a lot of shooting. A lot of stuff films there. And it was up on a very high floor, like the 30th floor or something like that, the penthouse level. But yeah, that was downtown. That was all built inside.
Let me ask you, Michael, just to go back a little bit, with the script, how did you guys approach this together between you and Mike Werb to come up with the concept of Face Off? And with that, how long did it take to finally get to a studio to be looked at?
Well, and I feel a little unprepared because Mike is not here, obviously, so I'm going to probably speak for him a little bit. Face Off started really because Mike and I were both screenwriters separately. We had gone to film school together, and were both just getting kind of going in the business. So we decided to write something together. We didn't really have an idea. But at that time, everyone in Hollywood was looking for the next Die Hard. So we got together and said, all right, well, what kind of Die Hard movie can we come up with? And we said, well, there hasn't been a Die Hard movie yet set in a prison. And that was really the start of it. We really started out as a gritty prison break movie, against an Attica kind of riot, in which a cop goes undercover in this prison to get some information and then ends up being caught up in a riot that no one expected, and he's on the run. And that's really the very initial thought, the genesis of Face Off. And then Mike, we kind of mulled that over. By the way, this took place over about 3 days. It took place over the 4th of July weekend in 1990. We got together and said, let's figure something out. We had no ideas prior to sitting down. We just said, let's just spitball. And so it evolved really quickly between the two of us. And then Mike said, well, he thought about it, said, it's a little grim. What if the prison is a prison of the future? What if it's set in the future? And I was not down with that at first, but then he really convinced me that, okay, let's move this more into a sci-fi realm. So anyway, we thought, well, what if we get this FBI agent into this prison? He gets caught up in a prison escape and nobody knows who he is when he's on the street. We said, well, how do we make that work? If it's the modern day, it would be hard to really justify. He can't just go home. He can't just call his office. He can't just, it just seemed like that wasn't feasible. So we talked around it. It took about 3 days. And then we kind of just hit upon this idea. All right, well, he takes the identity of a guy he captures in the beginning to go undercover in this crime organization. But initially, that guy who ended up being Castor was dead. He never came back in this story. And then somehow we just kind of kicked it around until it was like, oh, well, what if that guy's not dead and he's just in a coma and he wakes up and now he becomes the other guy and they swap lives? And to give credit where it's due, Mike had the great idea. Once we hit on that, he said, yeah, and they're both better people as each other. And so when we kind of hit upon that, that really is what gave shape to the movie, to the script. But we wrote our first draft. This was now in the fall of 1990. It went out in January of 1991 on the day of the Gulf War. We had a meeting in the late 1990 with Mike's agents, and they said, we're going to send it out on January 17th or whatever the day was. We said, look, George Bush, President Bush, number one, that's when he said, that's the deadline. They're going to attack. That's like the only war in history that had a start date. And they said, nobody in Hollywood cares about that kind of stuff. Well, the day came along and we sent the script out, expecting everyone to flood us with offers on that Monday. The phone doesn't ring. And we call the agent. We said, what's going on? He's like, are you crazy? Our country's at war. Haven't you been following the news? The office is closing down. William Morris closed early that day.
Oh, my God.
Because the war in Iraq had started, the first one in Kuwait. We did manage to sell it. We optioned it to Warner Brothers. But our big dream of a big score did not take place. We were thrilled to sell it, don't get me wrong. But our grand plan of having a big, Shane Black-like haul did not materialize. And so it landed at Warner Brothers in early 91. And so that's kind of how it landed.
And did it stay there for a while because it was obviously produced by Paramount and we were on the lot and so forth.
Yeah.
How long was it at Warner, or did it have a sleepover for a couple of years, or how did that work?
Yeah, we optioned it for, I think it was 18 months or 2 years to Warner Brothers, and we did 2 drafts of rewrites for Warner Brothers and for Joel Silver's company. They were happy to option this. It didn't cost them very much money, but they really were not that interested in it. They already had Demolition Man coming out, which to them was similar turf, futuristic, mano a mano. So they just, they were kind of confused by it. They didn't seem to understand that the actors would switch roles. We actually had a meeting early on in Warner Brothers with some executive whose name I don't recall, who said, well, how is this supposed to work? Makeup has not advanced to the point where someone can wear someone else's face and make it look real. And we said, you understand that the actors switch roles, right? That the one guy plays the other guy. Okay. Oh, that might work, they said. At Paramount, Sherry Lansing, who was the chairperson of Paramount, read the script. She loved it immediately. And so she was like, I got to make this movie. And that was the difference between Warner Brothers and Paramount. We there were a lot of ups and downs on making Face Off at Paramount, but we always had the support of the top person. And that's how the movie got made. She just was determined to make that movie, and come hell or high water. And she did ultimately, although it did go through a lot of ups and downs.
With that, was Nick and JT attached to it from the beginning?
Mike and my big fantasy was that they would cast, this is back when we were selling it the first time, and our dream was to get Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone in a movie together. Because the movie only really works if you have guys who have personas.
Yes.
You can't put people in it who nobody knows. They need to have personas to play off of. And who had bigger personas in those days than Sly and Arnold?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that never happened. And that's a blessing, of course, in a way, although it would have been cool. But by the time it landed at Paramount, Mike and my thinking had evolved, because we thought, a lot of people had come to us saying, oh, can you put Dolph Lundgren in it? So we made a lot of lists. We had De Niro and Pacino, against each other. And we had a ton of lists. We had a crazy one, David Bowie and Mick Jagger, with a million different crazy scenarios in which these guys could, a good match. And actually, before John Woo came aboard, Nick was definitely on our list. And Nick and Johnny Depp were looking to do a movie together because, as you know, they're great friends. Around 1995, this is way before Pirates of the Caribbean, and I know a lot of your listeners know Johnny Depp from Pirates of the Caribbean. But prior to Pirates of the Caribbean, Johnny Depp was not really a movie star. He was a very good actor, obviously, but he was in a lot of art films. And around the mid-90s, Sherry Lansing said Johnny Depp should be a movie star, and they put him in a movie called Nick of Time. And they tried to get him kind of into the action mode, action film mode. And they wanted Johnny Depp to be in Face Off. And Nick, I guess it somehow had gotten the script at that point, and he wanted to be in Face Off too. And Paramount would own. Now, this is prior to leaving Las Vegas. And Nick had been in Kiss of Death for Paramount, maybe in a couple other movies that hadn't done that great. So Paramount's attitude was, okay, we love these guys, but if Johnny Depp's yes to this movie, then Nick can be in it. Well, Michael Douglas, who was then the producer on the movie because he had a deal at Paramount, Sherry Lansing asked him to produce the film for the studio. He chased after Johnny Depp for months and months and months, trying to get Johnny Depp to read Face Off. And Johnny Depp eventually read half of it and said he thought it was going to be about hockey, which is why he agreed to read it to begin with. And he passed. Now, we went back to the studio and said, look, what about Nick Cage? Nick wants to do it. Nick could play either part. And they kind of just tabled the whole thing at that point, because for a lot of other reasons, nothing to do with actors, but they were having trouble with finding a director, etc. So the whole thing kind of, anyway, but that's the first time we heard Nick was interested. Travolta didn't come on until much later, after John Woo was attached.
And how was John Woo attached? Was he, did he kind of help green light it 100% at that point? I mean, it was green light, but why was John Woo so interested?
Well, during that dead time when Warner Brothers had the script, so one night, Mike and I, just to hang out, went to the New Beverly Theater, which is now owned by Quentin Tarantino, and it's a revival house. And they showed this movie. We saw the trailer for this movie called The Killer. The trailer was insane. But I had never heard of John Woo or Chow Yun-fat or anything like that. But the trailer was like, oh my God, what the hell is that? So just as film fans, we went to see The Killer. And we sat through it. And then at the end of it, The Killer, we both turned to each other and said, Face Off is a John Woo movie. And then we had never met John. We didn't know who John was, where John was. We knew nothing about John Woo, except the themes that were all over The Killer or all over Face Off. Well, as it happens, John Woo had just come over to America, had just signed with the William Morris agency, which represented my writing partner. And we found out later that John had actually been sent Face Off back when Joel Silver was the producer. We didn't know that. We didn't know who John was. And John had read it and said, oh, it's too futuristic. Well, 2 years then went by, and we found out John was at William Morris, and we called John's agent, who Mike knew, Pat Dollard and Mike Simpson and all those guys all worked together. We said, please let John read Face Off. So John read Face Off and said, oh, they took my note. They took all the science fiction out of it. That's great. And he wanted, and he wanted to do it, but he was already scheduled to do Broken Arrow with Travolta. Mm-hmm. And so he couldn't do Face Off. That's when we met him the first time. He said, I just want you to know that Face Off is the best action script I've ever read. Little did I know, John said that to every writer who walked in his door.
But, he's always so polite.
We were, of course, floored and so happy. And we said, well, why don't you direct it? And he looked at his partner, Terrence Chang, like, yeah, why can't I direct it? Explain that to me again. So anyway, so John went off to make Broken Arrow, and the studio put another director on Face Off. And that's the Johnny Depp and Cage stuff started to happen. But it took so long for Johnny Depp to pass that by the time Johnny Depp passed, John Woo was done with Broken Arrow, and he was available again. Wow. And now John Travolta, as again your listeners probably know, was in the midst of this great post-Pulp Fiction renaissance. Mm-hmm. And John Travolta had never played a bad guy in his whole career until he played one in Broken Arrow. And he loved it, and he loved John Woo. Suddenly, the serendipity started to come into it. And in fact, we had another lucky break because they went to Travolta and said, look, this movie's starting to heat up. Do you want to do it? And Travolta said, well, I'd love to work with John again. And I love the idea of working with Nick Cage as my doppelganger in this film. They had been looking for a movie together, too. But John was supposed to make a movie for Roman Polanski called The Double. And so he wasn't going to be available to make Face Off when Paramount wanted to make it. And then 2 weeks before The Double was supposed to start shooting, Travolta was in France and everything. The Double fell apart. The Double crashed because there were rewrites and it changed a lot and it became a comedy, and Travolta didn't want to do it. So Travolta was suddenly available. And then when Travolta said, okay, yeah, I'm in, then things really started moving really quickly.
Well, they were both big stars. I mean, they had equal billing for the most part, Travolta and Cage at that time, and it was like superstar to superstar. Nick coming off of The Rock, which is another big hit, and his Academy Award with Leaving Las Vegas. I had worked on all those films, and we just came off of Con Air, and I remember that we started the very next day. It was done quickly because all of a sudden we ran over on Con Air with Simon West directing, and the next morning we were on Face Off.
Yes.
On stage, and it was like, how did this movie come into play so quickly? But it wasn't. It was set for a long time. It was just once Travolta got in, it just kind of like it set the stage immediately, I guess. Yeah,
and the great thing, we had a good laugh because Paramount was like not so sure about Nick back when Johnny Depp was involved, and because we have Travolta, and Nick's not, we're not really sure, Nick's not as bankable, blah blah. Well, right after they cast him, Nick wins an Oscar. Wins his Oscar. And so that was right in the middle of Paramount's negotiation with him to do this role. And of course, his quote went crazy. And we were like, that's what you get for not casting him back when you could have.
It's like buying real estate too late.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it worked out. Again, one of the very, very lucky things that happened was that Nick wanted to do the movie for a long time. And the studio got very excited once he won the Oscar, and I think they were happy to pay him more money because it validated that choice a little bit. So that was probably early '96, And he was about to go do Con Air because he was not going to be available, for a while.
I want to ask you, Michael, very rare have I seen, other than Charlie Kaufman on adaptation, well, he only came and went, but everything was word for word in that script. And it was shot that way with the writer and the director and cinematographer kind of collaborating. You guys were on set a lot for an action film. Working on Gone in 60 Seconds, we had script doctors back and forth, but you guys were the actual screenwriters of Face Off and were there a lot. Like, I had not seen that before. Why were you guys there all the time? Was that a choice by the director, the studios, or because you were co-producers?
It didn't have much to do with our credit. We got that credit because, although we did a lot of work on the movie, aside from writing, we got that credit when David Permit optioned the script from us. When you read the script, it was hard to understand always who was doing what, because we identified the characters by their character name, regardless of whose body we were seeing. And so I think a lot of times reading the script, people couldn't follow it. And Mike and I would laugh because we thought we would probably have been fired if someone had just gone through the script and just wrote in the names of the actor in every scene. Then they wouldn't have needed us, because lots of times we would go on the set and Travolta or Nick would say, "Who am I in this? Which am I seeing?" Because of course, as you know, it's shot, break it up in shots. And so, you can't always know. But I think what really ultimately did it for us was our relationship with John Woo. We were so thrilled to have the movie going, but at that time, of course, we knew a lot more about John's films. And we really consciously said, we have a chance to make a John Woo movie here. Not just like a big Hollywood movie with John Woo directing it, but a John Woo film that can sit with all his great films, Hard Boiled and The Killer and A Better Tomorrow and all these great movies. So let's make sure that John is supported, because that's not always the case, There was a lot of work to do during the production on adjusting for locations. Lots of times the actors, not just John and Nick, but a lot of the actors would have issues or questions about the dialogue. Could they riff? Could they not riff? What was being lost or not? And you want to make room, obviously, for all these collaborative people. You don't want to just hire John Travolta or Nick Cage and then tell you, no, you got to do it exactly like this. Yeah. Unless it's a really great reason.
Well, they bring so much to the table. Both those actors bring so much. They had their followings and they're veterans of film by this point. They did ad-lib, Michael, did they not? I mean, there were scenes. One was, "'cause I don't give a fuck."
Right.
So I'm going to guess that was ad-libbed by Nick. Could I be wrong? And also when he was doing the face off, because he did it so many times that I think that I kind of remember the two of you guys behind the monitor looking at each other, looking at John Woo. We're watching Nick and doing this whole thing, and everyone's like, where did that come from? Did we write that? Did we miss a page? And I would stare at you guys, and I looked at John Woo, and I'm looking at the producers. I see the script supervisor, a little dumbfounded, and I'm thinking, I don't remember doing the stand-in portion of that part of the scene. Did I fuck up? Am I fired?
No. What happened was the dialogue was in there, but it was not nearly done as expansively as Nick did it. And actually that day, by coincidence, studio had been sending out these memos about, should we change the title? And they had terrible ideas because they were concerned that, people will think it's about hockey. We had the backslash in the name so that people wouldn't think it was about hockey. There was a lot of just mishigas about the title, and they were proposing a lot of terrible titles like The Switcheroo and all these terrible things. And we were healthy talking about it, and Nick said to Mike, my partner, it's like, "Oh, don't worry. After today, it'll be Face Off." And we were like, okay. We didn't know what he had planned, but clearly he worked it out with John, because there's this. It's not just like they had a two setup, and had the camera on him. They come in from above on Nick, and he's going Face Off. So they had cooked up kind of how he was going to make a big meal out of that moment. And then, of course, he got Nick Cassavetes to riff with him about it. Yes. And you probably went back and forth like Face Off, Face Off, Face Off, Face Off. They went on. I mean, it was cut down in the movie to a couple, but it went on and on.
On and on. While we were shooting it, I was just like, is this a joke? Are they fucking around? Are they mocking the script? Are they mocking the characters? What's up with Cassavetes? Is he pulling a greasy Greek on us? Like, what the hell was going on?
Yeah, all the above probably. But what was fun for us, and you probably won't hear a lot of writers say this, But what was fun for me and Mike is when, like, for example, in the beginning of the movie, when Nick is the priest and he's planting the bomb. Well, that's the only scene that Nick got to establish that character for himself and for the audience. And so he did riff. He did the head whipping and he grabbed the girl's butt and went, oh, you know. So when we saw that stuff coming in on the dailies, we said, oh, we got to get Travolta to do this when he's the bad guy. And so we would find a place in the script that we hadn't shot yet and said, okay, here's a scene. So later on in the movie, when you see Travolta's in his office and he's now the bad guy, he's now Nick's character, and he grabs the secretary's butt and goes, oh, you know, that was because of what Nick did. That's what Nick improvised early.
Oh my God, that's brilliant, Michael. I never thought about that.
So anything those guys did that jumped out at us is like, oh, that's really cool. Let's find a way to get the other guy to do it when they switch roles.
It really is beneficial to have the screenwriters there. I mean, sometimes these studios don't want you there, the director doesn't want you there, but look what you do bring to the film, and look what you can add on or take away or change or throw two little words that I think many times the studios make a mistake and they disrespect the writers who actually brought this show to life.
Yeah, I think that is a mistake that it's part of the culture for whatever reason of movie making. I think it flies in the face of the director as the premier talent on the set. And the flip side of it is in television, because the writers are never fired off a television show. The writers are the ones who run the show. And so I think there's a reason why TV, especially now, the last 10 years or so, TV has really exceeded. One of the reasons is exceeded movies in a lot of ways in terms of interesting stories, interesting characters. Just every time you turn on the television, there's some new, exploring some new kind of pushing the envelope, I guess, of the form. And you don't see that in movies that much anymore, unless they're very small, private little movies like we saw, La La Land or Moonlight, in which it's a writer-director or people who are really working closely together. But in the big studios, movies, I think it's a lot of times it's like what happened with you guys on Gone with 60 Seconds. It's just sort of one writer at a time. And Mike and I have been those writers, not on that film, but we have definitely been on a list of writers that have worked on movies that, you do your whatever, couple weeks, and then you're off.
I agree with you. I working on Face Off and all the films I've done with Nick, and they ask me all the time, they're like, what is your favorite film you've ever done with Nick? I said Face Off. And everyone's like, why? Because for such a large budget, intense, dramatic film, so many hotshot actors, trailers, directors, producers, locations, 6 months of shooting, 15-hour days and beyond, exhaustion, the mood of the set I had never felt before or since, Michael, and I think it stems from John Woo. John Woo brought a certain casualness to this intense film, and everybody else collaborated. It worked between the writers, the actors, the director. Everybody just felt like we're on this big fucking team, and we're doing good. And no matter how tired and sick we were, this was like, I'm showing up to work on Face Off. It became that.
I agree. I think John set the tone. We had one moment in the production toward the end where I started to panic one day because we were already over scheduled and we were supposed to shoot the big scene that ended up being in that chapel. And that originally had been written to be shot outside at a grave site. And it was a much bigger piece of work. And guys from the studio were there and they were panicking because it was going to be so much money and take so many days. And Barry Osborne says, we have to move this inside somewhere because we can't shoot it outside. And Mike and I were like, oh my God, it's all going to fall apart now. It's all going to fall apart now. And John Woo just said, I got it. Don't worry. We said, well, don't we have to write pages? He was like, no, don't worry. So John said, okay, let's put it inside. Fewer people. I can cover it all inside. And John Woo, we were very lucky because John came from China, obviously. John had made 50 movies in China. I mean, John is one of the most prolific filmmakers of all time. Mm-hmm. So even though a lot of people didn't know him in Hollywood, he'd done this kind of stuff all the time in Hong Kong where they would lose a location at midnight and have to come up with something. I mean, a tremendous amount of improvisation that would go on in John's Hong Kong movies where they just had to figure it out because he had the movie in his head and he knew it was going to work.
Well, after working in China, you can do anything, in my opinion, especially on a film. So it's like when you come from those countries and you have such a stylized world and they, ask you to alter your physical position, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's easy. It's not a big deal.
John had, apparently someone told us well before Face Off, when John came over and was making Hard Target, he had a tough time at first because the stuntmen weren't allowed to jump through real glass. He had to use glass, and John didn't like that. John's like, it doesn't look real. Because in Hong Kong there's no union, there's no rules. You do something, the director wants you to do something, you got to do it, and for your own, to save face, I mean, it's that whole thing. So they're a little harder on their actors in China than it's allowed to be.
Hence Jackie Chan.
Yeah, exactly.
Who just does it all and breaks 1,000 bones.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So this film gets released. It becomes a massive hit in '97. And what happens after that? You guys win the award at the Saturn Sci-Fi Action Horror Films Best Writers. John Woo wins Best Director. Yeah. What happens to you guys as a writing team, the Mike and Mike's, the M&M show?
We got a lot of opportunities. Even before Face Off came out, there was a buzz about the movie. And we got a lot of opportunities to rewrite action scripts that studios were trying to make around town. Mm-hmm. And some of those we took and some of those we didn't. We sold a spec that we wrote that was more of a kid's movie. We worked on Collateral Damage. We worked on Tomb Raider, which we got credit for. And then we ended up selling a big historical epic to John and Terrence and Bill Mechanic, who just was nominated for Hacksaw Ridge. And Nick was attached to that. Chow Yun Fat. But it was just so expensive, and it just never happen.
Huh. Isn't that interesting how all those things work or don't work?
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many things, including Nick's Superman, which I remember going into the test wardrobe for at Warner Brothers. I mean, so many things that could happen don't happen. What I feel is TV is where film was years ago. The quality of film, like Face Off and so forth, which I think was the last decade, the last heyday of Hollywood, from my experiences. Once you hit like 2002, 3, 4, it all started to crumble. The union started to crumble. Writers are not respected much anymore. Production became very boring, mainstream, and all the writers and actors started to flood the TV. And that's also why we have such great television today, and the building of the networks of Amazon and Netflix and so forth, because that's what it's needed now. I mean, and film work is like, it's okay now.
Yeah, Hollywood is always reinventing itself. There's always good times and bad times. It's a constant state of crashing and rising again, like civilizations. But I agree with you. If you just look at Paramount, Face Off was made at Paramount. And in that era, we worked at Paramount a lot. This is like the mid-'90s to the early 2000s. And we worked there a ton when Sherry Lansing was running it. And I think it's instructive to look at that one studio, because Sherry Lansing was a producer back in the 70s, and she started in the business as a young woman, and she was around for that golden age of the Godfathers and the early days of Scorsese and all these great filmmakers, including her husband William Friedkin. And so she grew up with a different sensibility, I honestly believe that's why Face Off got made. When she read Face Off, she looked at it as a producer, not as an executive at a publicly traded corporation. And she said, oh, okay, this is Good and Evil Twins, but in a different, kind of with a fresh spin on that. And I think that when she left that, and of course, look, Paramount, it's not like every movie they made was a success or even good. But I think that she came at it from a showman point of view, that if she responded to something on an emotional level, she would make the movie, or she'd attempt to make the movie. I think after she left at that studio, Brad Gray came in. Brad Gray, he's a manager. He's an extremely successful, talented guy, but a different mindset. And I think that what you see out of the Paramount's output since then, it's been a lot of sequels. They've been mining their library a lot. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's because they don't have ideas. They want to make fun stuff too, and exciting stuff. But because of the economics, because of the financial constraints, they have to be successful, and so they have to put their resources into stuff that's a good bet or a safe bet. So you get more Transformers movies, you get more Mission Impossible movies, more Jack Reacher movies, and some of these movies are great, are fun. I like the Jack Reacher movies a lot, but some feel like, okay, another Transformer movie, you can't really tell it apart from the previous one. I mean, I happen to like Michael Bay. I think he gives great spectacle filmmaking, but the movies are not that exciting on an emotional level. Anyway, but I think that that's part of where the business has gone, where there's less room, there's less daylight in the boardroom to take a chance to make something new and spectacular and try to wow an audience. I just don't think the economics are there anymore for them. It's just, you lose your career. And I think it's what's happening at Disney now is another kind of the far end of that, which is Disney doesn't need writers anymore. Disney doesn't need pitches. It doesn't need original material the way other studios always have, like people like Mike and me to come in and pitch something or write something like Face Off. Disney moved really aggressively. They've got Pixar. They've got Lucasfilm. They've got Marvel.
They've got big machines, big machines.
Yeah, they know what movies they're making for the next 5 or 10 years. They have their schedule. They make 2 original movies a year, 2 that are just standalone things. And those haven't been doing that well, so they might not even make those anymore. And so that's kind of where the studios are. Look, for every sort of setback like that, another opportunity comes up. And so now we're starting to see, obviously, it's not a surprise, Netflix just spent $110 million to make the next Scorsese movie with De Niro and Pacino and Joe Pesci.
I just read that.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. But their economics, their business model support that. Hollywood studio can't support that anymore to put that much money into that kind of film. And one day, I hate to say it, but one day Netflix will struggle. Netflix will say, hey, we can't afford to give $500 million to Baz Luhrmann or someone, to make a TV series. But for now, it's good. For now, there's opportunities there. So, and it's great for the consumer. I mean, that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, people around the world want to sit down. They want to enjoy themselves. They want to forget life for a couple of hours and enjoy themselves. And there's more ways to do that now on your screen than ever. And I think that's fantastic.
I agree with you. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, that whole era during that whole face-off was wonderful. It was the last heyday of Hollywood, of big blockbuster movies with a story, and you were a part of it, Michael. I mean, to me, I think it's exciting. I was a part of it. And there you are writing it from scratch. Like from 1990, you wrote it and you just kind of like tickle until it got done. I mean, and to this day, you're forever going to be known for that. Not only other films and other scripts that you may be working on in TV and film, but that particular film has a place in Hollywood history for the rest of your life and our lives.
Thank you.
I get called on it as a stand-in, let alone you're the writer of this. You developed it. You created it from scratch with your business partner. I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean that sincerely because everybody talks about that movie.
Well, even at the time, I think Mike and I definitely appreciated that this was a singular experience, and almost certainly no writers get to have as positive an experience on a movie at that scale with so many A-list heavyweights. For us to have been involved and for it to have worked out so well for us and for seemingly for everybody, it was a very harmonious set, as you say. I think people look back and think positively of that experience, proud of the movie, which is not always the case. But that was a big summer. That was a huge summer for movies. And I remember Nick saying that between Con Air and Face Off, that was like his double action album. Like record companies, the double album out. That was Nick's double album.
That was.
And those were really his first 2 big. I guess The Rock had been out the year before, and he was kind of stepping into that realm a little bit more.
Yeah.
And Bruckheimer was a great fit for him. I don't know if he's still doing action movies with Jerry Bruckheimer, but they were a great artistic fit.
They were. He did 5 films, 5 or 6 films with him. I did 4 with him and Bruckheimer. And they were pretty harmonious overall. Jerry Bruckheimer was on the ball whenever he showed up and made it run smoothly. It wasn't a John Woo film, which brought a sympathetic and a more loving ambiance to a film. To my surprise, Face Off was like going to be, oh my God, it's going to be this horror. It's going to be so exhausting. There's so much action. And then John Woo shows up. He was the little white dove. On the set there, he's just like, hello. I almost ate myself out of a job. I remember eating by craft service at one point. I'm having donuts and I'm starving. I needed sugar rush. I'm having cappuccinos. I was doing Frappy Happy Cappies. You know, I had non-fat this and fat that. And I'm sitting there and I'm starting to swell up and I've got Tylenol coming in and I'm tired. I'm going to do the prison scene that I was beating up Nick in that scene that somehow they gave me the part. I don't know why. And John looks at me and I'm like, hi, John, how are you? He says, oh, you are no look like a Nick Cage no more. I said, what do you mean? He says, oh, you so fat that you should work for John Travolta. I almost died. It's like I'm eating myself out of a job. He's telling me, you're so fucking fat. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to have a job tomorrow morning.
Yeah, well, that was an issue at the beginning because you say Nick was in Con Air. In fact, Mike and I were invited to the dinner when Nick and John got together, and Nick walked in from the set of Con Air, and we were all having this lovely dinner at a producer Steve Ruther's house in Bel Air. It's the most Hollywood thing I've ever done. And there was this buffet and all this lovely food, and Nick came in. Travolta was already there. And yeah, Travolta looked good, but he was definitely bigger than Nick.
Yeah.
And Travolta said to him, any chance you can put on a few pounds before shooting starts, because, you know, we're supposed to be the same size. And Nick was like, I'm playing a guy who's been in prison for 6 years. Nick was thin as a piece of spaghetti.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. So skinny. And so Travolta started putting food back the platter. He's like, I guess, wait, I guess. But yeah, that was an issue. That's pretty funny. But look, what are you going to do on a movie set? Everyone puts weight on a movie set. You just can't not. Brownies and bagels, and the food was spectacular on that movie.
Well, he had Tony Karam.
Oh my God!
Couldn't stop eating. That was Travolta's. He's always in Travolta's contract. I loved that. I was so happy. He was also in Bruckheimer's contract with Barry Waldman. It was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have steak and lobster every day, because I knew when I was not going to be working, I'd have tuna fish sandwiches at some cheap little sleazy deli for $2.99.
That's right, man. You eat on the set and keep your per diem.
Oh, it's exactly what I did. That film, by the way, Michael, was the film that Arthur Anderson, the first AD, helped me along with Nick's management team and his agency, that Richard Lovett at CAA, helped me get my contract on that film. So I was which is why I had a casting credit the entire time versus just on the stand-in thing. And I ended up on a big actor's contract on the entire film, in addition to having the acting part, which was part of Arthur Anderson's and John Woo's decision. And with that is why I still, 20 years later, still get residual checks, bizarrely enough.
Arthur, I think that was their first movie together, Arthur and John.
What a great guy.
I believe. And again, one of the many miraculous things that happened for us and the movie was those two guys, because they just had such, and still, I think Arthur went on to make a lot of John's movies. Was he on Wind Talkers?
He was on Wind Talkers. We had Joan Cunningham as a second AD. She was wonderful, lovely girl. So 20 years later, life still goes on. There is life after Face Off. It's iconic. There is life for you. There's life for me. There's life for Mike Werb, John Woo, and everybody else. And we're still all alive. We're healthy. We're working. Yeah. Acquired some wealth and a decent lifestyle. You're married and have kids. And I'm married to my hair products, which is good enough for me. And so,
yeah, we really got lucky with all the crew and all the department heads and all the talented people. And it was very, very fortunate, really fortunate. Look, again, you've been on tons more movies than I have and seen it up close. And it's always a miracle when they even ever get made, let alone turn out well. That's even a bigger miracle. So we are very happy with the way the movies turned out. And even my kids think I'm cool.
Yeah. Because fantastic. Dad wrote Face Off. I'm telling you, Michael, even from, I'm an outsider for the most part. I mean, you guys are on the inside, but even my little tech kids over here, I call them my little tech monkeys, my tidy whitey boys, and all the other people I speak to, even older people. And so they all talk about that film more than The Rock, more than Con Air, more than National Treasure. They're like, it's Face Off. And I'm so happy you wrote it, because we got to work on it. So
yeah, it brought a lot of good people together, I have to say.
So, Michael, thank you for taking the time
Thank you, Marco.
to doing the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marco. Much appreciated. See you later, buddy.
This concludes our podcast with Michael Colleary, co-writer and producer of the cult classic film Face Off and faculty member at UCLA. Until next time, this is Marco Curis signing off.